And welcome everyone to this session on what organisations say about reverse and sometimes known as reciprocal mentoring. And we have a panel session today, and I'm delighted to be joined on the panel by Sandra Wilson of British Transport Police. Sandra, say hello for us.
Good morning, everybody.
Thanks, Sandra. And Jo Channon from British Transport Police.
Good morning, really happy to be here.
And Morium Akter from Grant Thornton, UK.
Good morning, everyone, and also Eid Mubarak to anyone who's celebrating today.
Lovely. And Lawrence Parsons from Grant Thornton.
Good morning, everybody. I'm sitting here. I'm one of those that has decided to return to an office for the day.
And last but certainly not least, James Brown from Grant Thornton.
Morning, everybody. Great to see you all.
So as you can tell, we have a good number on our panel today, and we want to make this as a lively a session as we possibly can. We want you to also put any questions, observations that you might have in the chat, because at the end of the session, we want to answer some of those questions and engage you with the conversation. But before then, the way we're going to run it is I have some questions for the panel members. So you'll get some ideas about how they run reverse or reciprocal or either or. And I'll say a little bit about that in a moment in their own organisations. And then Morium and James are going to tell us about their experience of being a mentoring pair. So you're going to hear it at the grassroots. What's it really like to be in that situation? And also we have a video from British Transport Police giving us some information there about how it runs. And then it's over to you. All those questions that you're going to put into chat, we will start answering those and sharing those. So what is this reverse mentoring? And you know, think about it as going into the future, how we're going to use it. It started in the 90s with Peter Welch. I think he organised something like 500 mentoring pairs in his organisation, Jack Welch in his organisation. And it was about getting the organisation fit for technology. And that hasn't really gone away. You know, the idea was in Jack Welch's mind that he had the native digitals, the young people who knew about technology, and then he had the immigrant digitals who didn't grow up with technology. So he decided to have that reverse arrangement, and the younger people were able to work with the senior people and able to share their skills. And it also helped the younger people to be engaged with the senior leaders and learn more about their business skills. Now, the phrase reciprocal mentoring, I first heard in our mentoring conference last October, and it gave me the idea for this panel actually. And looking at reciprocal mentoring, it is interchangeable, I can see, when I look at some of the literature on reciprocal and reverse mentoring, but it's also about the relationship, getting more engaged, what it's like to connect with another human and have that kind of equality in that relationship, and how you can then, in that case, be more vulnerable because you've built the trust. So we'll hear more about, I know from our panel today, about those different facets of reverse or reciprocal mentoring. I'm probably going to refer to reverse mentoring to keep saying both words. Please read the same reciprocal reverse for both. Okay, let's get started then. So this first question is for Jo Channon at British Transport Police. So Jo, what was the rationale for introducing reverse mentoring into your organisation?
Morning, everyone. Thanks, Lise. We've been calling it reverse mentoring as well, but I understand obviously others refer to it differently, and it's interchangeable, as you've said. But really, some of the key drivers behind BTP introducing the concept, and it is, you know, a brand new concept to BTP, despite, as you say, it's being around since the 90s. So it was a real innovative step or approach for us. But what some of those drivers were certainly around inclusion and diversity. one of the challenges we face as a national police force is to be representative of our communities. Certainly a driver around increasing, our underrepresented groups and communities, and also seeing those reflected at the more senior levels of the organisation. So that's really key to British Transport Police at the moment. So that was one of the drivers. One of the cultural pieces that we've been working on over the last 5-10 years is that cultural change piece. Because as you can imagine, being a police force, traditionally we've operated under typically a command and control style leadership, and that's absolutely right and proper when the time calls for that. So in a time critical or safety critical situation, absolutely we want leaders that can command and control. But when it comes to people development and talent management and personal growth, what we recognise is that we need a different style of leadership. We need a more transformational style of leadership. We need a coaching approach. And so we've been really working on that over the last certainly the last 5 years, goes back a little bit longer than that, but in a more concentrated way over the last 5 years or so. And Sandra can talk more about that as she's the lead in that area. So a new approach to leadership was needed. We were also undergoing major transformation at the time. So, with any major transformation, any change comes a level of uncertainty, a level of downsizing, restructuring, all of that stuff. And also bringing the force into the 21st century. So, getting us digital savvy. And that kind of comes back to what you were saying, Lise, about how this all started in the first place. And one of the other factors is that we have got a really young in age and in service terms, young workforce. And of course, they bring with them all those digital technical skills, which isn't necessarily reflected in the more senior ranks of the organisation. That's quite a general statement, but it's true nonetheless. And there was, I think what we appreciated was that there was a disconnect between those lower or more junior ranks in the organisation and the more senior ranks. And that was causing a number of conflicts, I suppose, if you like. So those were some of the factors behind why we introduced reverse mentoring.
Oh, thank you, Jo. That's really helpful and gives us a good insight into what you did in British Transport Police. And it's been so lovely to see you on full screen. So can I remind everyone to put their view on speaker view, and you can see the speaker more clearly. So thanks, Jo. Lawrence, would you like to add something to this same question from Grant
I think
Thornton?
there'll be many similar. Although Grant Thornton is an accountancy and consulting firm, in a way that the drivers for us were very, very similar to the Transport Police. We've got about 5,000 employees around the UK, and out of that, it is quite a young workforce. We bring in about 250 graduates and school leavers a year. So we do also recognise that difference in demographic between new, fresh people coming in and a different kind of mood that we get from our leadership. They're part of a different demographic. I think for us, we have quite an established coaching culture already. We've got about 70 job plus coaches. We do coach supervision. So there's a number of things in Grant Thornton who are already used to a kind of coaching and mentoring culture. Even though people might kind of not know the labels or the proper terminology, it's something that's always bubbling along. And in Grant Thornton, coaching is something that's available for every single employee, and we use it a lot for people who are high potentials, career progression, people returning to work after absence. So this territory is something that we've been working with for quite a long time. But like many places, last year, over the last 2 years, we've realised that the inclusion debate is something that we really need to get to grips with. It's something our CEO, kind of when he came in a couple of years ago, it was something when he went on his tour around the employees that he realised he also needed to get to grips with. So we're kind of in a very lucky position that our CEO stood up in front of all his leadership team and said, actually, I'm being reverse mentored. And I think others should do this as well. I think he's had a couple of reverse mentors, someone from a gender point of view and also someone from an ethnicity point of view. So that's kind of where we've come into it. And then for the purposes of this, after the death of George Floyd last year, reverse mentoring was something we also wanted to really do much more from an ethnicity point of view. So around 6 months ago, and that's where we really started to kind of do this officially, as it were.
Lovely, thank you, Lawrence. And I'm loving hearing it's coming from the very top of the organisation. That really does support it going through the whole of the organisation when you see it at that level. And the sort of inclusion, I also saw that in some of the literature where, you know, we make assumptions and our biases that comes through our own socialisation. And it's that support again with having that reciprocal mentoring in place. And the word reciprocal is primarily used when it comes to inclusion and diversity, I've noticed. So great to hear it reinforced by you. So can I go back to Jo, please? And Jo, what approach did you take to introducing reverse mentoring into BTP? You're on mute, Jo, the famous words.
Apologies.
That's all right.
So yeah, we took a slightly different approach, which I'll explain in a moment. But I suppose our focus was around that, around the inclusion and diversity agenda, and about the fact that we are underrepresented, as I mentioned before, by certain groups in those more senior ranks, particularly around Black and minority ethnic groups, females, and disabilities as well. So to start with, we approached our support association for Black and minority ethnics, which is called SAME, and we worked very much with them hand in hand about how we develop this program, because we wanted that to be the place where it started, and we wanted to be as inclusive and open to everyone. So whilst we did initially recruit from that community, we did open it up further as well to include everybody in the program. But in respect of the program itself, I took a bit of a different approach, and I went for a sort of speed dating affair, which I thought would be a lot of fun, and I really wanted it as a pilot to be really high energy, because I wanted everyone to enjoy the event, have fun doing it, break down some of those barriers, whether they be perceived or real, and really just get a lot of people in the room that perhaps wouldn't ordinarily have access to one another, and start those conversations going. So we took a slightly different approach, and we had this speed dating event. So prior to that, I delivered some training for the mentors. So those are the more junior members of the organisation. So they had a day's training, which covered things like, you know, what reverse mentoring is, some of the challenges that they were anticipating, and there were quite a few, as you can imagine, from some of those people that really just don't have the opportunity to speak to a senior officer or a senior member of staff, and how they might approach that, what their roles and responsibilities were. And we did a lot of work around contracting, because we knew that would be really key, and the benefits and what strengths they had to bring to that relationship, and some listening, questioning skills, etc. So they had some training, and then we ran this one-off event, which saw us basically speed date our way through, and essentially the mentors were already in the room, and the mentees, the senior members of the organisation, came in and rotated round, spending 10 minutes with each mentor before moving on to the next. Now, the idea behind that, and there is a method to my madness, the idea behind that was that I was hoping that would generate some more natural alliances to form. So rather than just anonymously match two people, what I was hoping that by meeting lots of different people, they might form some natural alliances which would likely increase the likelihood that those partnerships would evolve and grow rather than fall by the wayside. So that was the thinking behind it. And again, also that, as I've said, that I really wanted it to be a fun, high energy event because I wanted it to be sustainable and ongoing.
And was it fun and high energy? I'm dying to ask Jo. Was it accepted in that way?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it really was. And, you know, Sandra will talk a bit more about the findings from that. And obviously, you know, what we learned from doing it that way. And there was some, you know, some positives and also some things that perhaps we would do differently next time. But that, you know, that's the whole point. We were just kind of feeling our way through this. But yeah, it was really enjoyable event, you know, really positive. You know, we got some great feedback from both the mentors and the mentees. But as I say, we might approach it slightly differently next time. But as a pilot event, I think it was a good way to start things off.
Right, it sounds it. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Lawrence, would you like to add something for this question from Grant Thornton?
I'm still a little bit in awe of your speed dating approach to this, and in better times I think I'll be encouraging Grant Thornton to do exactly the same.
It's a cracker, isn't it? Yeah.
Our approach was actually really different, and looking back, I think in retrospect, we found the right approach, but by accident. So when we started this, one of my colleagues, Jane Barnett, she heads up inclusion here in Grant Thornton, she basically emailed all of our partners, all 180 of them, said who would like to be reverse mentored. And using the social network within Grant Thornton, there were about 12 people who initially took part and said, yeah, I'll do this. And we've actually let it grow organically. And our belief behind this is we don't want to force change. We don't want to mandate change. We want people to choose to buy into it. It'd almost have a word of mouth effect. And we've actually gone from a situation of just 12 leaders originally starting to get involved in this. And we've now got a total of 75. So over a period of time, it's just been word of mouth. And what we've encouraged our mentees to do is if they have chosen to do something slightly differently because of something that their mentor recommended to them, we ask them to come just make it public so that it becomes clear to people that things are happening because of these relationships. I was in a leadership a couple of weeks ago and someone I can't even remember the detail of it, but even in that meeting, someone was saying, actually, we're going to do this. We've now chosen to change things slightly. But it was around Eid. And it was saying, we were going to do something on this date. We've actually decided rubbish time to do it because my reverse mentor suggested that we might do that. So we were kind of taking a word of mouth approach. And in terms of sourcing the mentors, we have kind of an ethnicity network in Grant Thornton, and we've got about 600 people signed up to the webpage getting updates on it. So we've actually been in the slightly strange position of having far more people offering to mentor than being mentored. So we kind of have, you know, I feel like we're in kind of a lucky position at the moment. But looking back on it, we think that kind of organic word of mouth approach was probably the right one to take. Because of that, it does present a few logistical differences because we've always got this dribble of new relationships coming through that we have to work out. So I kind of like the idea of the nice and tidy speed dating event that allows us to do it all in one go. But you know, in retrospect, we've taken a good approach.
Thanks, Lawrence. And hearing you say it's growing organically within the organisation, and then I'm hearing it kind of the mentoring pairs come along. Is there some kind of organisation then around it, or is it literally it just grows and people manage it, self-manage it?
So there is organisation. So behind the scenes, we have a number of different groups in Grant Thornton for people to get involved in. They can choose to be an inclusion ally. They could choose to be a mental health first aider. So if you like, we are slowly gearing the infrastructure that it gears around. So rather than having a specific agenda for this, we're adding it into the existing infrastructure. So if someone chooses and says, I want to volunteer for something, this is one of the boxes on the form. We've just had a load of new partners have their new partner induction. This is one of the things that was spoken to them about. So they were told, you know, as new leaders in the firm, this is something they could get involved in. So rather than kind of a specific comms plan, we're just filtering this into all the existing infrastructure.
Right, right. Because one of the questions that came up in chat while you were talking was asking a question from Catherine around the kind of subjects and objectives mentees have.
So the informal feedback we're getting at the moment, although we put this in originally for ethnicity, I'll be interested, Joe, to hear what you say in a moment on this. We're discovering that the conversations range very widely. It might start off around ethnicity, but then they might talk about what it's like to move back to offices, what it's like well-being issues. So I think it's providing partners with a bit of a sounding board to give them a really different point of view on decisions they're trying to make. And in a way, I kind of love that uncontrolled nature of it. You know, we can't predict what issues 75 of our leaders are going to face at any one point, but this gives them, so we can't kind of pre-program in answers or things like that, but this gives them a great opportunity to get another point of view.
Yeah, great. And there's another question around the training. You did mention training for mentees, I believe. Is there training for mentors as well?
Do you want to go first, Joe, on this? I'm conscious I've spoken for a while.
Sorry, can you hear me? Great. Yeah, so we did a day's training for the mentors. So as I mentioned in my previous response, about what reverse mentoring is, what sorts of challenges they would face, quite a heavy focus on contracting, listening and questioning skills. So yeah, in respect of the mentees, so the more senior members of the organisation, we did a briefing, so just kind of a sort of informal discussion with them as to how the concept would work, etc. But I think, again, that will form part of what Sandra goes on to talk about in respect of how we might approach that differently next time, in the view of the fact that we probably would do something more robust if the mentees, and for a number of reasons which Sandra will share with you shortly.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Was there anything you wanted to add, Lawrence, on the training side?
I'll just say that's something that we're reviewing at the moment. We did some briefing sessions when we originally did this in the first wave, and I think because it's been organic, it's been harder to make that happen. So we're still thinking about, okay, how do we make sure we're a bit more consistent about this?
Yeah, it sounds, you know, you've both got into it and let's go for it and see where we go and organise it as much as you can. And then, you know, there's great learnings that come from that, which takes me to the next question, actually. And I'm going to focus on Sandra here for this one, first of all, Sandra. And we'd like to know what evaluation you might have completed in British Transport Police and what were your findings, especially the highlights, you know, what worked really well, what kind of obstacles did you come across that, you know, the learnings that Joe and Lawrence have mentioned that you might do differently, and what benefits and anything else you'd like to share.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Interesting one, because when I joined the organisation, I sort of went on one of the training courses with Joe, and I was at the speed dating event as well. We took a risk because we started this pilot during COVID, and we took a risk that we actually had a COVID safe speed dating event, which meant that not all the mentees met all the mentors. So Joe had to split the day. So one of the sort of feedback from the mentors was that they didn't get to see all the mentees and they would have liked to. And that was because of COVID. So going forward, I loved the speed dating event. I thought it was high energy. People really enjoyed it. It was different from normal business. It gave everyone a chance to sort of take off the rank and file and just have a conversation. And going forward, definitely would like to keep that part of the of our reverse mentoring. Other highlights, senior leaders have felt that they now understand what's happening on the ground. You know, sometimes when you're sitting there developing policy procedures and making real decisions for the business, you don't always understand how it translates to the person on the front line. And they said they really benefited, the mentees have really benefited from that. The mentors have felt a newfound confidence that they can speak to someone at a senior level, because prior to that, a lot of them didn't have access to senior levels. And also there was something around the privilege. Sometimes when people are in privileged positions, as in senior positions, they talk amongst each other and think that everyone has the same access. But actually, when you meet someone that's at a much junior level, you realise it's such a big gap that it's actually, you know, it's closing that gap and giving people a chance to talk about what it's like for them on the front line and to offer advice and support and value in that employee. So that's some of the key highlights. Power dynamics was an issue. It took people a long time to warm up to the fact that this mentee was someone that they could talk to on a sort of one-to-one basis and it wouldn't impact them in any way. So there needs to be, going back, I think when we do our training, we need to talk a little bit more about the power dynamics from the mentor and the mentee point of view. What we did find as well is that some relationships reverted back to the traditional mentor and mentee relationship. So I do think there needs to be some more work around development of mentees in terms of expectations, and also helping them to work, put themselves in the other person's shoes so that they can get a feel for how they can approach it as well. So I think maybe that might have been a missing component. But generally, when I sort of said, would you be involved again, overwhelmingly people wanted to be involved in this reverse mentoring, but it was reciprocal mentoring. Both parties both got something from it. Both parties felt they benefited. Both parties took away loads of information from themselves, and it was lovely. It was absolutely lovely to see the mentees grow, develop, build this confidence in themselves. And it was also lovely to see senior management say that, you know what, I'm going to consult more. I'm going to actually come out more and get the information off the ground. So there's a lot of real positives, and it is something that BTP wants to roll out in October. It's forming part of our one of our reports on Moving the Needle action plan, which is about race, but we're also rolling that out to include the other sort of groups that are underrepresented at senior levels as well. So I would say it's a really positive experience. We learned lots from doing it. I'm glad that Joe took the sort of reins and just jumped in and done it. It would, you know, you always have this thing about it would be nice to have all the things set out right at the beginning, but sometimes you just got to go for it. We took a risk doing it in COVID, which was particularly problematic for us because we are an emergency service, which means that government was given a lot of legislation and our police officers interpreting that on the street. So sometimes meetings were a bit problematic, but what also helped was having teams, having the digital capacity. One of the other criticisms that we had was that it was very London centric because the training was done in London, you know, and so going forward we'll definitely be more regional. But with Teams, again, we don't necessarily have to be more regional because Teams allows us to access people across the whole of the country. So some really great learning, happy to share the learning that we've learnt. But yeah, sort of key things would be dismantling the ranks and formal structures, giving people an opportunity to talk across different departments, meeting different people, understanding dynamics at the top. So what you got when we had some sort of one-to-one interviews, people say, I really get it now. It's really hard being at the top, isn't it? I really understand how difficult that is. And then you've got the senior manager saying, I get it now. You know, it's quite difficult when we translate this strategy or this policy on the front line. Maybe we need to meet together a bit more and talk about the impacts of that for our people on the ground. So it's a really, really good experience in that. Joe, I'm not sure if I missed anything or do I need you to come in on anything?
No, I don't think so, Sandra. Lots of positive stuff. I suppose one thing that I would just add maybe, although the speed dating event was really popular and went down really well. One of the things that they said is maybe longer sessions with each person. So I organised it so it was 10 minutes and then you moved on. And the feedback we got was, well, yeah, that wasn't really long enough for them to start really understanding and each other, building those natural alliances. So, you know, if we were to use that approach again, we would probably change the timings. But yeah, no, overall, the feedback, as Sandra said, has been really, really positive.
I mean, I think the only thing I'd say with the speed dating is that we did take a risk.
Yeah.
In COVID, where it had to be COVID safe, which meant that Joe didn't have the time to really lengthen the number of conversations.
Oh, thank you, Sandra. And, you know, that's a real example there of how powerful this approach is in terms of organisational change. You know, there's lots of benefits coming out from what you were saying there for the individuals who, you know, felt cared for and recognised and supported. But, you know, the bottom line for the organisation is that culturally it's bringing around change from what you're saying. And also it sounds as though improvements right across the board, basically, in a culture that's, you know, a history
command and control,
really strong hierarchical command
very
and control.
Very much so. And to show that the benefits of it, that's why they want to roll it out in October as a part of an ongoing programme. To enable people of difference, any difference,
yes,
to have an opportunity to learn, and for people at senior managers also to have an opportunity to learn what it's like for different people in different roles.
Yeah. And what it sounded like, it is a real learning intervention. It's not just an add-on, it's something that's kind of integrated into the fabric of the organisation now. And I'm hearing the same as well from Grant Thornton. I'm going to go to, thank you, Sandra.
Thank you.
I'm going to go to Lawrence now to hear about any evaluation or findings that you've had so far, Lawrence. You've touched on some of those, but would you like to elaborate?
Yes, well, a lot of it has been feedback as we've gone along. So I kind of recognise the stories you told, and I'm just remembering one partner who said, you know, he's got two teenage kids at home, and you know they raise eyebrows at him every time he speaks because he's kind of not in their world. And he actually came in and said, I realised I have been in an echo chamber. I've been existing in my own bubble. So we're realising that it's genuinely changing mindsets for some of our leaders. We're about to go live with our first kind of customer satisfaction survey for this. So we're going to do a couple of things. We want to do the quantitative. So we're going to do the survey so we can get, which is going to go live in a couple of weeks, so we can get some quantitative feedback from all of the people involved. We're also organising some meetings so we can hear those stories from the mentors and the mentees. So we're going to kind of bring the evaluation in. And looking at the comments there on the kind of length of the relationship and feedback, and one thing I'd bring in here is that, you know, no one relationship is going to be the same, and we've noticed that, you know, a third of the relationships have been really transformational, a third of them have been good, a third of them have fizzled out. When we look at some of those that have fizzled out, they may have had 3 amazing meetings that achieved a huge amount, and then it just kind of stopped. And we're thinking, okay, maybe that was, we don't want to be too judgmental about it. Maybe that was transformational, and you know, it was natural for it to close. So we're looking in our systems and controls, thinking, how can we monitor whether these relationships are live, so that we can then think about, well, is this concluded? Do we evaluate? Do we have a mentor that we can now give to someone else? So without trying to control it too much, we're looking into kind of how do we keep in tune with what's going on.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so a kind of emergent evaluation, really, just to see where it's taking you from feedback that you're getting.
Yeah, if I look at what we do with our coaches, we contact all our coaches every couple of months to find out what's going on. And we're looking at similar infrastructure for this. So even if we're not seeking to kind of control it, we're at least very close to it.
Lovely. I'm getting some messages up about some of the sound quality, and I can hear some noise in the background. So if I could just ask everyone, if you're not speaking, if you could kindly put yourself on mute if you're not already, that's really helpful. Thank you. Yes, sorry, Lawrence, I think we got everything that you were saying there, but you kind of kept disappearing for a little while in the background there. Jo, did you want to add anything?
No, nothing that springs to mind at the moment. I think, you know, evaluation has been ongoing for us, and we've captured some really good stuff. And as I say, we hope to roll it out again in the next, well, later on this year, embedding some of the learning that we've taken from it. But yeah, you know, it is really part of that huge culture shift that we're working on around becoming a learning organisation. So it's really just one piece of the jigsaw, but the benefits have been amazing. So yeah, it's really good.
Great,
So,
thank you.
just
So
wanted to
really,
add
yeah,
that,
go on, Sandra.
yes, I wanted to add that when we did the evaluation, I did it, part of it, and just to sort of help for Lawrence maybe. And also I got 2 colleagues from our Leadership Academy to do the evaluation as well, because I felt that if I sat on the focus groups, people might not be as honest, because they felt, you know, it's my you know, me and Jo are working on this. So basically we had some people that weren't part of it to do the evaluation, like the focus groups. We also had a questionnaire, and we also had individual interviews as well, which provided us with the meat on the bone, so to speak, on what went on during the reverse mentoring process. Yeah, so I just wanted to add that in case Lawrence might find that useful.
Yeah, lovely, thank you. And I did hear you say earlier, Sandra, that you were willing to share your findings.
Yeah, once I've got permission to do that, I'm happy.
Yeah, and you know, it may well be that there's people that are listening to the event now that would really like to hear more. I'm sure there will be, not there may be, I'm sure there will be,
Yes.
interested in what your findings are, because it helps everyone, doesn't it, when they're implementing schemes of this nature. Thank you, Jo, Lawrence and Sandra, for answering those panel questions, and a lovely segue now to hear what it's really like in reality. What does it feel like to be in a mentoring pair? And I'm going to invite James and Morium to speak, and I'd like to ask you, first of all, James and Morium, what were your thoughts and feelings, both of those, as you went into this mentoring arrangement?
Morium, would you like to go first, or shall I? It's up to you.
I don't mind going first.
Go for it.
So I had originally requested to volunteer to be part of the mentoring scheme, because I thought maybe I can give back in some way. But leading up to our first call, when it was booked into the calendars, I was of course very nervous because of like the power dynamics that Sandra mentioned earlier. That was one of the major things that I was worried about. Feeling like, will I say something wrong, or just will we fit with like me being at a lower level than James being the partner? I just thought it would be different, and I wasn't of course very comfortable with the idea of that, because I've not had as much exposure speaking to someone at a senior level to this level that we have spoken. So yeah, very nervous at this first stage, and this was more leading up to our first meeting that we had. And then afterwards, I feel like we've obviously we had our first call and it was much better, but first feelings were definitely skepticism, in terms of wondering whether it will be worthwhile, like what I share, will it be important or reflective in any way? And of course the other thing is that me being in a different society, like my cultural views and ethnic views are potentially different than what James was aware of. So that was something that I was of course conscious of, and I didn't want to be like offensive in any way. So yeah, that was my first views of before I joined the scheme, and of course just trying to make sure I didn't offend myself in the process as well. So yeah, over to you, James.
Yes, well, you've done brilliantly, and then we'll come on to that. I think, well, for a start, if you told me 6 months ago I'd be talking with over 100 people about reverse mentoring, I'd have been somewhat surprised. And it's lovely to be here. I think, I mean, I've long actually, I came at this with hopefully a very positive view, because I've long advocated the fact that we should permanently have somebody under 30 on our board, because as Lawrence said, easily a majority of our people are under 30, and therefore why don't you include their views at that sort of senior level? But going into it, I didn't know what to expect at all, and I think that's actually something, and I fed this back to Lawrence, it would be good to have a little bit more prep, because reverse mentoring, I just thought, I don't know, am I going to be with somebody young who's going to tell me whether it's Harry Styles or Little Mix at #1 at the moment? And so it was very sort of, oh, gosh, what's going to happen here? I think I was very nervous. In fact, I think I said to Morium when we first met, you are the least nervous person on this call, because, dear gosh, I work with lots of different people. My friends, I like to think, are fairly diverse, but to have a one-to-one with somebody in this sort of environment from a different culture. I'm 54, I'm white, I'm English, I'm heterosexual, and to be put one-to-one with someone from a different culture, from a Muslim culture, is a pretty intense experience. And to be honest, and until I got to know Morium very early on in that first session, I was worried about saying the wrong thing. I was very much worried about playing to the cliches or archetypes that you would expect from somebody of my age, my background, and very worried of, yeah, certainly a little bit intimidated actually, which when you hear Morium talk about power dynamics, and I think that was mentioned earlier on, I went into it feeling very much the junior person here. Not that I hate hierarchies anyway, but very much thinking, yeah, I'm not in control here, and it's a bit scary.
And what I'm hearing coming from both of you is that anticipation of all the stereotypical ideas and unconscious bias and conscious bias that we transfer onto others, which we make a whole script up about what's going to happen in this relationship and how it's going to go, and all evidenced, you know, by what it does look like in organisations and the culture that does build up and the stories that we tell around here. So we'd love to hear, I'm sure, or I certainly would, and I'm sure other people would like to hear, how did you dispel some of those thoughts that you first went into? What happened over time?
Morium, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I feel like, so I happen to be, I would say, like in 3 categories. I'm female, I'm Muslim, and also I come from I'm like British, Asian, Bangladeshi. So I have like those 3 around about me. And I feel like, I think I would say it's probably we've just shared the differences that we have. And I think it's helped just, you know, I think it's a transparency about feeling confident in each other's space and not being worried about offending each other. And yeah, I think we've been very lucky to have each other and get on so well. And I suppose having that first call that we had, it was a great success. And then from there, we've had multiple calls, and I think it's just been transparency was probably one of the key words I'd say from our relationship in terms of our mentoring program. And yeah, it's been great because I suppose it's helped my confidence as well in terms of me not feeling as nervous as I probably would have been in our first call. But yeah, I've enjoyed it so far. I think I've just, yeah. Go for it, James.
Well, I've definitely struck lucky. I think why does it work? I think for a start, what Lawrence said was this is a voluntary exercise. I think people are choosing to do it. I think once it becomes prescriptive, you're in danger of feeling like an imposition. At best, some people would then think, oh, they've got to tick the box. At worst, people would resent it. So I think the first thing is that voluntary nature. People are going into it because they choose to. And as more people choose to, so further people will choose to. So it's a natural evolution. So it's yeah, I think that's the first positive. I think, though, why has it worked with us too? I think that mutual vulnerability at the start definitely came over. About we were both a bit nervous about this. What's going to happen? I have been lucky, and this is not false praise. I've been very lucky with Morium's manner and her ease of talking about things, but also talking about things in an inclusive way with me. I think I've seen one or two other instances elsewhere where it's been a little bit aggressive, and I think the more it can be collaborative, the more it can be people having a curious mind and wanting to understand things, but in an environment they can be comfortable in. And I said in one of our prep discussions, I think, I don't want to overplay this at all, but at my age, I see society, certainly in Britain, I see society more divided than I've ever seen it before. And I think if people could learn from the kinds of experiences Morium and I have had to be open-minded, to not be aggressive about things on either side, and the fact I talk about sides shows that society is a little bit divided. If you listen to people and you take on board the other person's view, you're more likely to find common ground out of diversity. And that very easy manner that Morium has had has helped me feel very comfortable, because I actually believe the older you get, experience, far from experience broadening your views, actually experience narrows your views, because you are honed by what you've learned, as opposed to being very open to new things. And Morium's style in this has been exactly the sort of style that is needed to make reverse mentoring successful.
Thank you very much.
Not at all.
You've had some great feedback in the chat, I must say, if you get a chance to have a look at it, and of course it will be saved so you can see it. And one
amazing. I would just add, if it's okay, because I could talk on this for hours and I won't, I promise you. I think however diverse however different we came into this, again, if you talk to people, and I do reflect on society, if you talk to people, you will find common ground. And so much of how we all think and how we're all wired and programmed is by reference to our upbringings. And I'm certainly not going to break any confidentialities here, but I certainly could find common ground with Morium in the pressures I had when I was brought up and the expectations I had when I was brought up. It's something that shapes you for a long time and does mean you are narrowed in your views, and having to fill those expectations is something I think we've both found common ground with. But that desire to, if you aren't willing to ask people questions about other views, you are inherently wishing to be ignorant. That's not a good place for anybody. And
no question is a silly question, as they say. So I can totally vouch for that.
I mean, we're now WhatsApp buddies, aren't we, Morium?
Yes.
Morium over Teams has met my family. When I was on holiday in February for half term, the only meeting I said I will have was the one with Morium. Sorry, Morium, you go for it.
I was just going to answer one of the questions in term. I think it was from Daphne regarding how we prepped for doing the icebreaker for our first court. I had been sent with a plan where it was set out what the first session will be like. It had a breakdown of each session. We've kind of gone off in our own little version of that plan, but I felt that definitely helped, because on that first session plan, it had guidelines of what you can say, not what you can say, but what you should do, such as ground rules, like what is acceptable for the other person. Just sharing, like, for example, if there's something I find offensive, then just sharing that with James to be like, it's not something I would feel comfortable you talking about. And just, it's like what do they say? It's like rules for our conversations. And then having a little background in terms of what we have had done in the past, and it's kind of like a job interview, I'd say, where you go in and they tell me about yourself a bit, and it's something like that. So, and following on from that, we just went off in our own tangent and just went from there.
I think, I mean, again, don't overplay it, and I say this with a lot of happiness. We're friends now.
Yes, I agree.
Well done.
Best friends.
TFFs.
Absolutely, and I now know what that means.
Oh, come on, James, get down with the kids. What's going on? Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. I can just kind of reiterate, the chat is full of praise for your mentoring relationship for both of you, how the easefulness that you have clearly together, the openness that you have together, the transparency that you've created. It's very obvious in your easy way of relating together that you could talk about anything openly, and I'm using the word challenge, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but any challenge that would come through to say, can we think about this differently, or this is not what I'm expecting, would be met with openness again, and let's explore it and talk further on it. I could just see that, I could just hear your conversations, and I'm sure everybody else can on the line. And yeah, you've given a wonderful role model example of taking this into the future, both of you. Really, you really have to hear.
Very much due to Morium. Very much due to Morium.
You give me too much credit.
Come on, the pair of you, just accept that you're doing a great job, and everyone's really appreciating hearing you, and in all seriousness, to see and hear the possibilities of reverse and reciprocal. You've got the relationship going there, as well as seeing things from each other's point of view. So great role model in there. Thank you so much. So I'm sure there'll be more questions. We will have time for questions in a moment, but before that, I'd like us to just listen to some words from British Transport Police. We have a video which we're going to show now, and that will give us an idea of how reverse mentoring is working in British Transport Police. So I'm hoping some magic will happen and the video will come up. Here you go. Thank you, Lou.
Pilot program that we ran earlier this year. But before I talk about that, I just want to point out one glaring omission, in that the reverse mentoring scheme isn't actually a reverse mentoring scheme in the traditional sense of the word. It was really important to me and my colleagues across British Transport Police that it became a reciprocal mentoring scheme, a way that everyone taking part, be they a mentor or a mentee, actually was able to get something from the programme. So in that sense, it's actually reciprocal. We might still refer to it as reverse mentoring, because ultimately that's what it started off as, and that's what it looks like on paper when you're flipping the script from someone's in a senior position mentoring someone in a junior position. We flip that around. So traditionally it is a reverse mentoring scheme, but it has reciprocal benefits. So one of the reasons why I wanted to get involved, and why I was quite keen to get involved in the pilot programme, was as a member of police staff, and particularly a member of police staff in a senior position, I have ready access, and relatively ready access and easy access, to our chief officer group, to our senior leadership team across the organisation. And sometimes I forget that, about how much privilege I have in that environment, that I actually am able to directly interact on a day-to-day basis with those people who are making decisions for the organisation. So it was a way for me to recognise actually that others within the organisation won't have that same privilege. It's a privilege that I do hold, but others won't. And I was quite keen, obviously, as the lead for inclusion and diversity, to look at how that impacts on their day-to-day activity, whether it actually indicates to them whether they are included or they feel included within the organisation, or whether that sheer inaccessibility to be able to speak to the organisation's leaders will lead them to think that they feel excluded. And it's really important we find lots and lots of different ways being able to tackle exclusion from the workplace. But I thought that the reverse mentoring scheme was a really great way of being able to actually directly speak to individuals in lower staff graded roles across various departments within the organisation, and as well as police officers and PCSOs who are at relatively lower ranks than those in chief officer positions. And to have that relationship flipped as well, where I'm not actually imparting my knowledge. I am indirectly, but actually that's not part of the scheme's direction, to actually hear from those individuals, setting topics of discussion, being able to kind of indicate what areas I might want to discuss with them, but actually allowing them to dictate and them to kind of influence what I was actually learning about them and their place within the organisation. Found it incredibly valuable experience, and I was lucky enough to be paired with actually 3 mentors, which might be a bit extreme, but actually it was really useful to see the difference in their opinions and the difference in their approach. And I was able to compare and contrast, actually, because what I made sure that I did was that allowing for natural kind of moving away from a topic, which would happen anyway in any natural conversation, would allow me to actually ask similar questions for each sessions. I can compare and contrast then with their responses. For those 3 mentors that I had, 2 very active that I was speaking to relatively regularly, and the 3rd, unfortunately, haven't quite had enough time to get to know them properly yet. But actually being able to ask that same question and see what kind of differing responses I got. So it was a hugely valuable experience to me, and I think, as I said, as the lead for inclusion and diversity, a really interesting way for me to be able to see firsthand and hear firsthand where those exclusions might be for all of our employees across various ranks and roles. I would heartily recommend it to all of my colleagues. In fact, I will recommend it to all of my colleagues as a particularly vital way of actually hearing the voice of our organisation in a less structured way than staff surveys might. So if I can say one thing, fantastic opportunity, congratulations to everyone involved in setting it up, and even though the pilot programme has now ended, I can confirm that those relationships with my mentors are continuing anyway, something that we've agreed to do post the pilot programme. So clearly a success, really valuable for me, and I would heartily recommend it to anyone thinking about implementing a reverse mentoring scheme.
Thank you, Lou, for sharing that with us, and welcome back everyone to the main session. And wow, there's Barry Boffey reinforcing exactly what you were saying, Joe and Sandra, around how you've introduced reverse mentoring into the police service, and an example from Barry having 3 mentors. I wonder how he copes with all those different voices coming at him around how he might see things differently. And please thank him on our behalf, won't you, for making the video and reinforcing that. And what really strikes me as well around my perception, I have worked with police forces over the years and really understand that command and control and really understand the culture. Well, I've been part of it, participating in it, I don't understand it. And I'm thinking how much you have to kind of juggle between changing the culture so that it's more integrative and inclusive, but at the same time, if stuff happens, you need to be out there and being that police service and acting where command and control actually works in those scenarios when you've got emergencies. So it's lovely to see that the 2 differences there coming together and how you've been able to integrate it so strongly. So yes, please thank Barry for that, and thanks for yourselves. So everyone, we have 15 minutes for Q&A now, and I'm very conscious that there's lots of stuff in the chat. So if we could kind of go on to gallery view, that would be helpful, because what I'm going to do is to invite you, all of you here, if you'd like to ask questions of any of our panelists who I think have done a brilliant job for us this morning, could you please raise your hand and then speak up? Otherwise we can choose some of the questions out of chat. who would like to take that question, Tim?
Well, I know
Why could it-
for
Go on.
British Transport Police, because we've just completed our pilot of 6 months, really it's about, for us, it's about learning from those lessons and trying to refine it for the organisation. There's a lot of work that the British Transport Police are doing with the community in which it serves, and maybe later on, but I think at this point in time, it's about how we work it for the organisation and really learning some of the lessons from the pilot. Really, that's our stance.
Yeah, I'd just like to follow on from that. Actually, one of the things I'm looking at the moment is a youth mentoring scheme, which will be with students from schools, paired with some of our officers, to have, what would be, reciprocal mentoring, because there's a real benefit in bringing the community and the police together, particularly in the current climate, where there's a lot of negativity, tension, etc. So that's actually something that I'm looking at as a separate piece of work, about how we can engage with schools and match students who are in that really crucial sort of phase, sort of aged 14 to 16, where they're making some very difficult life decisions, and match them with a really strong role model from the force, to sort of help guide and direct them. So watch this space, I would say, on that one.
Great. So yes, Tim, there's movement towards it.
Graham, what do you think?
I'm happy to take the question. I felt we had no barriers. And I suppose it's a sense of overcoming that power dynamic that we mentioned earlier and not letting that be an issue when we were talking. And I suppose it's all dependent on the mentee in that situation of making the mentor feel comfortable to be open. And that's definitely how I felt. I felt very comfortable in sharing my views and experiences and just not letting that impact me in any way that could potentially just sugarcoat the experiences, which I felt definitely helped, as in especially in that first call that we had, discussing the things that we would not feel comfortable discussing, which wasn't really much that we spoke about. So I felt like because we were comfortable with each other, there was no experiences or issues that we could speak about wherever there was a barrier. So we've had a very good relationship in that sense.
Yeah, and I there was always more likelihood I would offend Morium than the other way around. But I think, yeah, as we've gone on, the confidence to ask. I think one of the problems, and again going back to society, one of the problems is how the media portrays it. And actually, in the last couple of sessions, I've been asking Morium about things as the media portrays them, and actually wanting to hear that's not really what it's all about, and not being afraid, not tiptoeing around things that I want to know about.
And that was sorry, I know I'm coming back on to talk again, but that was my biggest thing that I wanted to portray in our mentorship. James was leaning towards believing what the media portray me as, but for me it was important to address that and to show that I'm nothing like what the media portrays me to be, and I feel like I've done a success in that sense. So it's trying to express my feelings in terms of what I think is correct, and hopefully showing the great side of my religion and my culture and my gender.
And what strikes me there is, so often through our own ignorance of being unaware, we shy away or we withdraw from asking those questions. And I think, again, you've given a very powerful case for just being there together in a relational way. This is what seems to give you that power to be able to ask those questions and feel it's okay, it's okay to show my ignorance. I'm using that word because we do lack knowledge between our cultures. We do lack the opportunity to speak together, and we've only just got to look at what's happening in the world, has been mentioned on this session. So a great
ignorance isn't a pejorative word. It's not an accusation. It only becomes a negative if you don't want to overcome it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
definitely.
Great. Thank you. Any more questions?
I can go first if you like. So in terms of matching, obviously we use the speed dating approach. So after the event, we asked the mentees, so the more senior members of the organisation, to identify which mentors they would like to work with. And at the end of that event, you know, everybody had been selected by someone, if not multiple mentees to work with, hence Barry having 3. So it was purely voluntary. There was no matching, there was no third party matching, and I think I alluded to the reasons behind that earlier on in the conversation, and that's because I wanted those alliances to form naturally or organically. So there was no third party involvement in respect of matching, but I think Lawrence probably has obviously a different answer to that question.
I have a go at answer. Can you hear me properly this time, Lise?
Yes, thank you, Lawrence.
So it's not a whole answer, but I think we were blessed by having more mentors than mentees to begin with. And one thing we noticed was that some people put their hand up for this because they almost wanted to teach the old blokes a lesson.
Steady. Morium got the golden ticket.
Catching you up there, James. So I think when we spoke to our new mentors, we kind of had to filter some of that out, and we were looking for people who were genuinely curious and were coming into this with positive intent, which did mean that a few people didn't get opportunities. So I think there was rather than deliberately making particular matches, we were just trying to screen out people who might not have been going into it for the right reasons.
In respect to the second part of the second question, which was around, you know, how do we sort of mitigate for failure and success? I think something of that nature. I think for me the important thing was the contracting. The contracting we did between the mentors and the mentees about, you know, how we would work together. And what that would look like, and where those lines in the sand were, if you like, about what was acceptable and what wasn't. And so, you know, we explored this a lot in the training, and before the speed dating event, the mentors developed their own contracting piece and shared that with the mentees, and got their buy-in, so everybody knew where they stood when they sort of entered into that event, about what was expected of them and where the boundaries were, what was acceptable and what wasn't, and that mutual respect and understanding. So I hope that helps to answer that question, if I understood it correctly.
Thank you, Jo. And I'm conscious of the time.
I was gonna add to that, Jo, that
go on, Sandra.
we didn't use the term success or fail. We were really conscious of that because we didn't want people to volunteer and feel that they'd failed. So what we used was it's a learning experience, and from that we will develop a program afterwards. That was really, the language around that was really important as well, so that people would volunteer and want to be involved in something that was for one person actually said it was an amazing experience because they didn't feel it was either going to be a failure or not. So it was a learning experience for all of us.
Wonderful. So as I say, I'm conscious we just have 2 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, there was a different reaction. So both from like friends and family, I would say, they were skeptical, and they were like, Morium, what are you doing? Like, are you sure this will be worthwhile? Like, and I suppose it's because of our experiences where we were like, it's not going to be worthwhile. That's what was shared to me. And for me, I'm always trying to like encourage good change. And that was something that I did get a lot of people telling me, you're just wasting your time. However, it's nice to just go back and be like, actually, here, I've proved you wrong. We're actually having a very good experience. So yeah, I've had a lot of people leading up to this program where they have been very negative, but it's about overcoming that and just proving them wrong to be like, actually, no, it's gone great for me. And I'm not just saying that because I'm on a call with 113 people right now. I do believe in it. And yeah, I feel like it's been a great experience so far.
And that's a wonderful positive note, Morium, to end our session on. I'd love you all just to take yourselves off mute and give a big appreciation to our panelists today, who I think have done a wonderful job for us.